All right, everyone, lots of Bernie Sanders remarks to be made. First, he was coherent enough at the debate to be passable, so he doesn't crash and burn quite yet. Just give it a little bit more time. Don't worry about it too much. He's not viable anymore as the nominee. So you got that. Then, of course, AOC, I believe, has endorsed Bernie Sanders. Well, that'll give him a boost with people who already fucking supported him, I guess, and take a little bit of wind out of Kamala Harris' sails, and that's pretty much it. But now you've got Bernie Sanders a couple days ago. I was going to cover this, but it kept getting bumped by other news. Actually calling out Warren. See, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have difficulty differentiating themselves because their platforms are basically the same. Lots more free shit, paid for supposedly by the top echelon of society, but if you actually delve into their tax plans, the parts of them that they can actually explain all include middle class tax hikes. It will happen. It'll also be a significant tax hike. Like for me, instead of paying, I can't remember what effective rate I was paying, I'll probably pay 5 or 6% more. That may not sound like a lot, but when you're not actually wealthy, you're just managing to get ahead because you've sort of made it and can pay your student loans and shit. And then you're looking at the possibility of an administration that'll have carte blanche to pass tax reform, which means me paying more, but probably won't have the votes to pass my debt forgiveness, free college, free shit. It probably won't have the ability to do that because corporate Democrats will hamstring it. That's a scary thought. The thought of paying an inordinate tax rate despite being fundamentally middle class, that should concern people. What I would say is this, though. Bernie Sanders came out and said, well, there's a fundamental difference between myself and Mrs. Warren. She is a capitalist, and I am not. So here we have, by the way, in black and white, Sanders again, for those delusional people who cling to the notion that he's not a socialist. He is a socialist. He is a self-proclaimed socialist. He advocates for socialism. He idolizes socialist ideology. He has no problem with socialist regimes, only capitalistic ones. At what point do you say he's a socialist? There's this like weird no true socialist bullshit movement among some of his fans to try to explain away the things that he's saying. So the state controlling the educational system, which is what free education means, and then subsidizing it with increased taxes, which will apply mainly to the middle class and small businesses. I don't care how you cut it. Sanders is not going to get Amazon to pay 3 point whatever billion like he claims. They'll use loopholes. They'll use offshoring. He's going to be powerless to stop them because they control Congress. So fucking stop trying to lie to me and say that it's not me paying for this bullshit. The government taking over healthcare and wiping out any privatization in an already broken system, broken because of less privatization. That's again, people spending more money. They're no longer voluntarily able to associate with anything health related. It's now government mandated and centralized. You're talking about increased environmental regulations. You're talking about increased regulations across the board for vehicles and building things and roads and everything else under the sun. The government taking on more and more of a role in people's day-to-day lives. At what point do we call it the socialism that it is? It's not social democracy. It's not liberalism. It's not basic leftism. It's not being a bleeding heart. It's being a socialist. Sanders is honest about this fact. At the very least, he's an honest socialist. They're as scarce as hen's teeth. Elizabeth Warren is also a socialist. She's just not forthcoming. And Bernie Sanders is willing to use the fact that she's not forthcoming to draw a comparison where there's no comparison or contrast to be made between his platform and hers. They're 99% identical. The only difference is that Sanders bothered to compile a PDF and explain, in half-hearted ways, how he was going to pay for part of his plans. Elizabeth Warren hasn't really done that. She even got called out by CNN on this. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it, Mrs. Warren? Fucking show us the numbers! She can't do it. Because the only way she can do so is to tell if she was being truthful. If she really wanted to explain her plans, she'd say, well, the middle class will pay an increase of 5 to 10% on what they're paying in taxes. We're going to eliminate a lot of their deductions. We're going to eliminate several things that Trump has imposed. Significant savings. He doubled the child tax credit. Look forward to that being wiped out. I believe he reduced the tax rate the effective tax rate on people whose income was self-employed, if they're within certain thresholds, by the way, impacting me in the process, up to a 20% reduction. Not on the self-employment tax. It's 15% across the board, flat, and self-employment tax up to 100K. It is fucking draconian for people like me. That's a lot of money. But you can get the base tax rate reduced some. It's you know, it's not a huge amount of money, but it helps. Certainly it's a reduction. Anything that reduces our onerous tax rate at this point is a good thing. We shouldn't even be having a cultural debate over raising taxes on anyone. Even the super rich pay too much, the poor pay too much, everyone does. What we should be doing is having a conversation on we should slash the tax rate by a good 50-60%. Where should we apply the cuts first? I think small businesses, entrepreneurs, the working class to the lower middle class gets hammered. Way more than people in more of the central middle class like myself. People who are a few tens of thousands short of that, who are in the fundamental lower middle class, they're the ones that suffer the most. Them in the working class. People who used to vote heavily Dem, because especially in the Rust Belt, who have been abandoned by the Democrats in favor of a bunch of yuppie socialism. Is basically what you have. You have the young urban professionals these days, instead of snorting coke and waving Reaganite slogans, they become Democrats, and they chop their hair off or dye it pink, and then they start drinking their kombucha, eating their kale chips. I mean, it's nuts. So yeah, Bernie Sanders being very honest. I'm a socialist, she's a capitalist. There's the difference between us. Well, it's not really true. But at least he's being honest. The only real contrast is that she's not. She proclaims herself to be this middle-of-the-road progressive. I'm a progressive, I'm a leftist like all the cool kids, but I'm sane. I'm not quite as far out there as Bernie. I'm not quite as far out there as some of these other people. I'm the sane one. I've got a track record. Yes, you've got a track record of lying about your ethnicity and grandstanding and pandering and taking corporate money from one campaign, rolling it to the next and calling it grassroots, which is what she's doing now. She had a tweet the other day, and her fans receive it with uproarious applause. Oh, I've got this grassroots campaign to take on Donald Trump. It's not grassroots. You already sucked corporations off for years prior, during an eternal prior campaign to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. You've been using that money since then to outflank your opponents without having to actually fundraise from corporations. Because by dispersing it a little bit over time, early on when you weren't the front runner, and it was a third place or so, you could survive. And it gave you the latitude you needed to outflank other people who didn't have that starting bonus of 20, 30 million big ones from Goldman Sachs and all these other groups. Elizabeth Warren is the most slimy, lying piece of crap in the entire Democratic field, which is why it's no surprise she's the front runner at this point, because she's obviously going to have the backing of the DNC. The corporate liberals don't mind her. The far left kind of likes her. They prefer Bernie, but Bernie is in ill health and he's nearly 80 years old, and nobody else who's on the far left in the field is viable. So they've basically got their candidate. I wouldn't be surprised if she's nominated. And it'll be the DNC up to their old dirty tricks, by the way. It'll guarantee I vote for Trump. I'll have no choice. I can't vote for Elizabeth Warren. There's not going to be any third-party challenger of any note, I don't think. We'll see what the LP does, but they've basically abandoned actual libertarianism at this point in favor of globalism. I don't know why they chose to do that. I guess because Bill Weld told them they could make more money. Basically turning the LP into a piggy bank is what it did. Maybe, I don't know, the Constitutionalist Party, maybe. Come on. Yeah. So I'm not a capitalist like she is. She's not really capitalistic either. We don't live in capitalism. We live in an interventionist model. There are things other than pure capitalism and socialism. They do exist. Believe it or not, there are other systems you can use. One is the mixed model we employ. It's not really free market capitalism. The government micromanages trade. The government regulates and taxes everything 5 times before it gets onto your dinner plate. That is not a free market situation. It is not free trade. It's not free markets. It's also not outright socialism. The government hasn't taken the majority of productivity and redispersed it involuntarily to individuals on an equalized basis. But it's getting there, and Bernie Sanders certainly wants it to function that way. That is socialism. It's also an eternally failed ideology that's failed since inception everywhere where it's ever been implemented. It has never worked long term. It always collapses the system, rots it from within, because people, and see this if you actually maybe come here and see fundamentally something closer to socialism, at least in some ways, from the U.S. Although there are some ways it's hyper-capitalistic, like here in the Netherlands. You'll see what it does is incentivizes people to, shave a little bit off the top, basically. That's what's going to happen. You try taxing Amazon at the rates Bernie Sanders wants to tax them and see what happens with their money, where they shuffle their wealth around. It's not going to be staying in the U.S. Oh, offshoring would be the new thing. I'd probably be offshoring. Even I would have to have a Cayman Islands mailbox. Some smart investor in a tax haven country will set up little tiny micro apartments that aren't even big enough for a human to fit into. They'll be like little 1-by-1 boxes that'll have a little postal code in the back and like a little tiny bed. It'll be a mockery of U.S. economic culture. It'll look like a little miniaturized, like a Playmobil hotel room. And for $10 a month, you can have your own Cayman Islands address or your own Cyprian address or something. And it'll be hilarious. And it'll probably make them a billionaire. Get on it. Somebody in one of these tax haven companies, get a building, a fucking warehouse, and build that. And see if you can't navigate the U.S. legal code enough to actually establish such a thing. You advertise it right, you become the world's newly minted billionaire. Just make sure who gave you the idea. Make sure you pay the piper a little bit, a little bit of an endorsement there. That's about all. Peace out.